Mishnah learning today is sponsored by David and Judy Marwick in memory of Rabbi Seymour Spolter, Rabbi Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. To dedicate a day of learning, go to mishnah.co/support or send me an email.
Yevamot Perik Yud Mishnah Dalet, fourth Mishnah, 10th chapter of Yevamot. We're continuing to discuss what happens if people go to Medinat Hayam, they go overseas, and then they think someone's dead, and it turns out somebody's not dead. So until now, we talked about if the husband went to Medinat Hayam, and then he and his son, and we thought the son was dead first, or he was dead first. Now we're going to talk about the opposite case. Mish halcha ishto the Medinat Hayam. So the husband stays in Eretz Yisrael, and the wife travels overseas. They said, your wife is dead. And he married his sister. Now, achot ishto is only prohibited, the wife's sister is only prohibited in the case where she's still alive, even if you got divorced. But if she's no longer living, then you can marry your wife's sister. So you married the sister, and then the wife shows up. So the Mishnah says, even though he unknowingly committed the Isur of achot ishto, of his sister, the fact that he was with his wife's sister does not prohibit the wife from returning to him. She's permitted to return to him. Why? The second marriage is nothing, because it was prohibited. We say that it's promiscuity. Even though he thought he was married to her, what are you going to do? Okay? Meaning the husband is inadvertently infidelious, and that's not a word, has inadvertent infidelity. That's better English. Okay, so therefore, mutar lachzor lo. Moreover, hu mutar bikrovot shniya, ushniya mutar bikrovav. The sister, I think I charted this right here. Here you have another sister. Let's leave these guys out. Okay, just these three people for now. Okay, so therefore, he marries. He thinks she's dead, but she's not dead. Okay, so since he thinks he's dead, so therefore he goes and marries his sister. But then she comes back and says, hey, what do you know? I'm not dead. I'm alive. Let's move this to the front. Okay, so she says, I'm alive. So that wedding is not a wedding. That's not a meaningful wedding. He's not married to her. So therefore, her daughter, he can marry her daughter because it's his wife's sister's daughter. It's not someone he had relations with. And we're going to learn in a future Mishnah, if you have non-marital relations with a woman, you're permitted to her relatives. We're going to see that in a little bit. So therefore, he's permitted to the relatives of the second wife. Vishniya, and the second wife, mutar bikrovav. Okay, the second, meaning Leah can marry his son, for example. Why not? Because they weren't married. There's no relationship. There's no halachic relationship between them. Okay. Amrulo, if they said to him, Meta ishtecha, your wife died. Venasa et achota. So he marries his sister. Ve'achar when they come back and say, Kayemet haita, no, she was alive. Umeta, and then she died. Havlad rishon mamzer. The first Vlad is a mamzer. Why? Because what happened? So they say to him that she's not really dead. Okay, she's mostly dead. Okay, so she's partially dead. So he marries the second woman, and then it turns out, so while the child that he has, while she's partially dead, the child that they have from her, that child is a mamzer. That child, I don't remember what color we use for mamzer. Lo aleinu. That child is, we'll make him green. That child is a mamzer. Why? Because while Rachel was still alive, then any child, it's achot ishto, which is a chiyuv karet, and that child is a mamzer. I'm pretty sure. Let me just check to make sure I'm right. I am, but let's say Rachel now dies. Now they have another child. So that second child is a totally viable child. No problem at all. Why? Because it's permitted beheter, meaning once Rachel is no longer alive, then any child, then Reuven is permitted to marry his sister because it's no longer achot ishto. That's the first part of the Mishnah. Rishon mamzer, v'acharon, the second one after she's dead, eno mamzer. Second part of the Mishnah. So I'm going to come out and say this. I almost never say this. This is very hard to explain. New case, Rabbi Yossi. Now, Rabbi Yossi is going to turn around and argue with everything we've said up until now. First and foremost, it's important to say that we've learned until now. Let's go back to our original case. Okay, we say she has to go. The first case of when a man goes to Medinat Hayam. Okay, a couple dies, Okay, and then they say made ba'alech, and they say your husband dies, and she gets married. V'achar kach ba ba'ala, and then the husband comes. So we say teitzei mizeh umizeh, that she has to leave each one. So Rabbi Yossi is going to argue with this premise of the Tanna Kama in a very vociferous manner. He's going to argue about this fundamental principle. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol sheposel al yedei achirim, posel al yedei atzmo. V'chol she'eno posel al yedei achirim, eno posel al yedei atzmo. Anyone who is posel through others is posel for himself. And anyone who is not posel for others, through others, is not posel himself. What in the world is going on? So the Gemara talks about this. I'm just going to have to explain it to you without, you can see the Bartanura goes about, it's long and it's in Aramaic. It's very difficult to understand. So I'm just going to do it in a chart, and hopefully I'll be able to understand it. I may do another chart. I'll be able to do it and understand it in a certain way. So the Bartanura says the following. What happened was, Reuven is married to Leah. Let's move this out here for a second. Okay? And Moshe is married to Rachel, and these are two sisters. Leah and Moshe, they go to Medinat Hayam. Okay? They travel. Okay? The brother-in-law, Reuven's brother-in-law and his wife, they travel overseas. And then people come and say, okay? And people, they came and said, okay? They told Reuven, they said, you know what? They're both dead. They died in a plane crash. Whatever. Tragedy. So now he marries. Rachel is a widow. Reuven is now left a widower. So Reuven marries Rachel. He marries his wife's sister. And then, of course, what happens? Moshe and Leah show up. So now Reuven is his second marriage. So normally we would say that poor Rachel marries a man, and then her husband shows up. We would say, Teitzei mizeh umizeh. She has to leave her husband, and she has to leave Reuven. So Rabbi Yossi argues on that. Rabbi Yossi says an entirely different thing, something totally different. Says Rabbi Yossi, in this an interesting case, here's what happens. Rabbi Yossi says the following. According to the Tanna Kama, Leah, remember Leah was married to Reuven, so we assume that it was through Nisu'in. He says, but according to the Tanna Kama, it doesn't matter in what way Leah was married to Reuven, okay? Nonetheless, depending on whether she was married through Erisin or Nisu'in, nonetheless, when Reuven marries Rachel, and Moshe comes home, Rachel is asura to her husband. Rabbi Yossi says that's not true. Rabbi Yossi says it depends on whether the first marriage was Erisin or Nisu'in. Let's take the first one. He says, if Reuven married Leah only through Erisin, so they didn't really get married yet, we'll make it Erisin. They were married through, does that make sense? Erisin. Well, we'll give them a blue. Okay, they're only married through Erisin. He said Aram Mekudeshali, and then he went home. Okay, and then Leah and Moshe. Reuven said Aram Mekudeshali. Leah and Moshe go on a business trip. They are presumed dead, so Reuven marries Rachel through Erisin. He was only married to Leah through Erisin. So the Rabbi Yossi says, you have to stay with me. Rabbi Yossi says, when Reuven marries Rachel, people are going to assume that the first marriage to Leah, since it was only Erisin, was Al Tanai. And therefore, he never really married her. When she didn't show up or she didn't come back, this marriage goes away. And then this marriage is the real marriage. He's married to Rachel. How could he marry Rachel? We have to assume that that Moshe gave Rachel a get. Moshe divorced her, okay? And then Reuven married Rachel. So therefore, since Moshe gave Rachel a get, Reuven married her because he was never married to Leah al Tanai. And therefore, when Moshe and Leah show up, if we just let Rachel go back to Moshe, Rachel go back to Moshe, we would say, hey, how could Rachel remarry Moshe after she was married to Reuven? People are going to say, I don't know why Rabbi Yossi says you would say this, but people are going to say that a person can be machzir grushato. He can return his wife after he divorced her, even though she was already married to another man. And therefore, Rachel is asura to Moshe. Okay? Moreover, Reuven, because we say that maybe it was a good man, he didn't really give her a get, but we're going to say that. So, therefore, since it might have been, we'll say it was a good marriage, guess who also has to give a get? Reuven has to give Rachel a get because maybe it was a good marriage. And therefore, he's asur to Leah because now she's achot grushato. It's really hard to keep straight. She is the sister of his grusha. So just like Rachel is asura to Reuven, Leah is asura to Reuven. Rachel is asura to Moshe because we're going to say it's a problem machzir grushato, and Leah is asura to Reuven because achot grushato, achot grushato. It's the wife of his divorcee. That's tragic. That's all if you have erusin, he says. But let's take it away. What if it's not erusin? What if they married through nisuin? If they married through nisuin, then it's no problem at all. Nobody will ever say that when Leah and Moshe go away and they're presumed dead, and Reuven marries Rachel thinking they're presumed dead. Nobody will ever say that there was a Tanai. Nobody ever thought that there was a problem. And therefore, since nobody ever thought there was a problem, we'd never have a chashash and assume Moshe gave her a get and then Reuven married her. Nobody would ever say he'd only marry the sister if he thought his wife was dead. And Rabbi Yossi holds that this second marriage has no chalot at all. And so therefore, since there's no chashashot, therefore when Moshe and Leah show up, Moshe can take his wife back. He doesn't have to, we don't assume he divorced her. Reuven doesn't have to give Rachel a get. And therefore, since it's not achod grushato, he can take Leah back. He can take Leah back as well. This is the meaning of the terms, kol sheposel al yedei achirim, posel al yedei atzmo. I'll read it again. In the first case, we'll move it back. If he's posel al yedei achirim, since he's posel for Moshe, because we're going to assume she is a machzir grushato, posel al yedei atzmo, he has to give posel himself. He has to give this woman a get, and therefore Leah is also asur. But let's move it forward. Let's go back now. Let's move that out of the way. Oops, we're going to redo that. On the other hand, if it's not, let's read the end of the Mishnah. If it's marriage to Rachel, as opposed to the previous Mishnah, okay, Rabbi Yossi says, when he married Rachel, it's nothing because they were never married, because she was already married because Moshe was alive. If he's not posel yedei achirim, and Rachel can go back to her husband when she shows up, then Reuven can take his wife back also when she shows up as well. That's what it means. Eino posel al yedei atzmo. I know it went way long. It's very, very hard to understand and very complicated. I hope I explained it well enough for you to understand. We'll stop here. Dedicate our learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a good day.